March 23, 1971, 11:34 p.m. Frank Lucas stood outside Bamonte's restaurant in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Inside, sitting at a private table in the back, were 5 men who controlled every illegal trade route from Sicily to New York. The Genovese family capos. They'd summoned Frank to this meeting with one simple message: come alone, or we come for you. Frank's lieutenant, his brother Terrence, grabbed his arm as he reached for the door. "Frank, this is suicide. They're gonna kill you the second you walk in." Frank looked at his brother and smiled. Not a confident smile. A calculated one. "Terry, if they wanted me dead, they wouldn't invite me to dinner. They want something. And whatever they want, I'm about to make sure they never ask for it again." Frank Lucas pushed open that door, walked into a restaurant full of made men who hated everything he represented. And what happened in the next 47 minutes didn't just save his life. It rewrote the rules between Black Harlem and the Italian Mafia forever. But here's what nobody tells you about that night. Frank didn't walk in empty-handed. He walked in with something more dangerous than any weapon. He walked in with information that could destroy every man in that room. To understand what happened at Bamonte's, you need to understand the war that had been building for 2 years. 1969. Frank Lucas returned from his trip to Southeast Asia with a new business model that terrified the Italian families. For decades, the Mafia controlled illegal distribution networks in America. They imported contraband from Sicily, processed it through their channels, distributed it through their networks, and made billions. The system worked because they controlled every level: import, processing, distribution, street sales. Then Frank Lucas did something nobody had ever done. He cut them out completely. Frank went directly to suppliers in the Golden Triangle, bought product at a fraction of the price the Italians paid, and brought it into America through his own channels. His operation was efficient and profitable. Within 18 months, Frank's business dominated Harlem, the South Bronx, and parts of Brooklyn. He could operate cheaper and still make more profit because he eliminated the middlemen. The Italian families were hemorrhaging money. Their operations couldn't compete. Their dealers were losing customers. Their bosses were losing respect. By 1971, the 5 families had lost an estimated $40 million in revenue because of Frank Lucas. That's when Carmine the Snake Persico, a capo in the Genovese family, called to sit down. 5 capos from the Genovese family. Topic: the Frank Lucas problem. "This black bastard is costing us millions," Persico said, slamming his fist on the table. "Our guys in Harlem can't sell anything. Our suppliers in Sicily are asking why we're ordering less. This ends now." "So we kill him," said Anthony Fat Tony Salerno. "Make it public. Make it brutal. Send a message." But Vincent the Chin Gigante, the smartest man in the room, shook his head. "You kill Frank Lucas. You start a war with Harlem. You think his organization just disappears? His brothers take over. His cousins. And now they're angry. Now they're vengeful. You want a war with an entire neighborhood. So what do you suggest?" Persico asked. Gigante leaned forward. "We bring him in. We talk. We make him an offer he can't refuse. He gives us a percentage of his operation. We let him keep operating. He refuses. Then we kill him. But we try business first." It was decided. They sent word to Frank Lucas through an intermediary, a corrupt cop named Detective Trupo, who worked both sides. The message was simple. Meeting at Bamonte's, March 23, 11:30 p.m. Come alone. This is not a request. When Frank got the message, his entire organization went on alert. His brothers wanted to go with him, armed to the teeth. His most trusted lieutenant suggested they hit the restaurant first, take out the capos before they could make a move. But Frank said no. "You go in shooting. You confirm everything they think about us. That we're animals. That we don't understand business. That we're not smart enough to sit at their table. So you're just gonna walk in there and hope they don't kill you?" Terrence asked. Frank smiled. "I'm gonna walk in there and make them wish they never called this meeting." For 3 days before the meeting, Frank did something the Italians never expected. He investigated them. Frank had cops on his payroll, not street cops, detectives, and even some federal agents who looked the other way, for the right price. He had them pull files on every capo who'd be at that meeting. Vincent Gigante, under investigation for labor racketeering. The feds had wiretaps on his social club. Carmine Persico, secret IRS audit, owed $800,000 in back taxes he couldn't explain. Anthony Salerno, his son was a degenerate gambler, $300,000 in debt to a casino in Atlantic City. Frank compiled everything into a manila folder. Names, dates, amounts, case numbers. Information the capos thought was buried. Information that, if leaked to the right people, would destroy them. March 23, 1971, 11:34 p.m. Frank Lucas walked into Bamonte's restaurant carrying that folder under his arm. The restaurant was closed to the public. The front room was empty. A single bodyguard, a mountain of a man named Gino, stood at the entrance to the back room. "You're late," Gino said. "I'm exactly on time," Frank replied. "Move." Gino didn't move. He patted Frank down roughly, checking for weapons. "Found nothing." "The briefcase," Gino said, reaching for the folder. Frank pulled it back. "You want to search this? You do it in front of your bosses. I'm not giving you the chance to know what's in here before they do." Gino stared at Frank for a long moment, then stepped aside. Frank walked into the back room. 5 men sat around a circular table. Vincent Gigante at the head, Carmine Persico to his right, Anthony Salerno to his left. 2 other capos, Frank didn't recognize, flanking them. The table was set with wine, bread, prosciutto. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a power play. They were showing Frank this was their world, their rules, their table. "Mr. Lucas," Gigante said, his voice soft, almost friendly. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." There was one empty chair directly across from Gigante. Frank sat down slowly, placed the folder on the table in front of him, and said nothing. Persico spoke first. "You know why you're here." "I have an idea," Frank said calmly. "You want to talk about business, about the fact that your operations can't compete with mine, about the money you're losing." Persico's face darkened. "Watch your mouth. You're here because we allow it." "I'm here because you asked," Frank corrected. "There's a difference." The temperature in the room dropped. Salerno leaned forward. "You got balls, I'll give you that. Walking in here, talking to us like you're somebody. But let me explain something. This city, these streets, this business, it all belongs to us. Has for 50 years. You're a guest. And guests follow the house rules." "And what are the house rules?" Frank asked. Gigante took over, his voice measured. "You've built something impressive, Frank. We respect that. Your operation is efficient. Your distribution is smart. But you're operating in our territory without permission. That ends tonight. Here's the offer. You give us 50% of your operation. We provide protection, political connections, and you get to keep doing business. You refuse, and you won't leave Brooklyn alive." The room went silent. The threat was clear. Frank looked around the table slowly, at each man, studying their faces. Then he opened the folder. "Before I respond to your offer," Frank said quietly, "I want to show you something." He pulled out the first document and slid it across to Gigante. "That's a wiretap transcript from February 14th. The FBI has recordings of you discussing the Teamsters pension fund embezzlement. Case number 71 CR 438. Gigante's face went white. He picked up the document, read it, set it down carefully. Frank pulled out the second document. "Mr. Persico, that's your IRS audit file. You owe $800,000 you can't explain. They're about to indict you for tax evasion. The prosecutor's name is Mitchell Abrams. He's building his entire political career on taking you down." Persico's hand started shaking. Frank pulled out the third document. "Mr. Salerno, your son Robert owes $300,000 to the Sandpiper Casino in Atlantic City. The casino is owned by the Gambino family. They've given him 2 weeks to pay, or they're taking his thumbs. You didn't know that, did you?" Salerno stood up halfway, his face red with rage. "How did you—" "Sit down," Frank said. His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive, but it had absolute authority. Salerno sat. Frank closed the folder. "Gentlemen, you invited me here to offer me a deal. Let me counter with my own. You leave Harlem alone. You leave my operation alone. You stop trying to intimidate my people. In return, I don't send these documents to the FBI, the IRS, and the New York Times. I don't tell the Gambinos where your son gambles every Friday night. I don't leak the wiretap transcripts that prove you've been skimming from the commission. The room was absolutely silent. You could hear the kitchen staff working in the distance, could hear someone's heavy breathing, could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Finally, Gigani spoke. You come into our restaurant, sit at our table, and threaten us? I'm not threatening you, Frank said. I'm offering you the same deal you offered me. Except mine is better. You get to keep doing your business. I get to keep doing mine. Nobody goes to prison. Nobody dies. We just stay out of each other's way. And if we refuse? Persico asked, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. Frank stood up. Then these documents are in federal hands by morning. Your phone calls are evidence. Your tax records are subpoenas. Your son's debts are headlines. And while you're all fighting investigations and indictments, I'll still be operating in Harlem. He picked up his folder. You have 48 hours to decide. Send word through Detective Trupo. Yes or no. Simple as that. Frank Lucas turned and walked toward the door. Every man in that room could have killed him. One signal from Gigante, and Gino would have put 2 bullets in Frank's back. But nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because Frank had done something none of them expected. He'd proven he was just as dangerous with information as they were with violence. Frank walked out of Bamonte's at 12:21 a.m. His brother Terrence was waiting in the car 3 blocks away, engine running, ready to flee. How'd it go? Terrence asked as Frank got in. Drive slow, Frank said calmly. We're not running from anybody. 48 hours later, Detective Trupo delivered a message to Frank's office in Harlem. It was a single sentence written on Bamonte's restaurant stationery. Harlem is yours. Stay out of Brooklyn. Frank Lucas had walked into a meeting where 5 powerful men planned to either control him or kill him, and he'd walked out with complete independence. No partnership, no percentage, no interference. Word of what happened at Bamonte spread through the underworld like fire. The story grew with each telling. Some said Frank had pictures of the capos with federal agents. Others said he'd threatened to expose their entire money laundering operation. But the truth was simpler and more impressive. Frank Lucas had understood something the Italian Mafia never expected a black man from North Carolina to understand. Information is power. Strategy beats muscle. And fear of exposure can be more effective than fear of death. Vincent Gigante later told his associates that Frank Lucas, he's smarter than all of us. He came to that meeting ready to die, but he made sure we'd die with him. You can't fight a man like that. You can only stay out of his way. The agreement held for 3 years, until Frank's arrest in 1974. During that time, the Italian families never moved into Harlem, never tried to take Frank's operation, never sent muscle to intimidate his people. Because Frank had proven something that night at Bamonte's. He wasn't just a street operator. He was a strategist, a businessman, someone who understood that the most powerful weapon in organized crime wasn't a gun. It was leverage. And Frank Lucas had leverage on everyone. Years later, after his release from prison, a reporter asked Frank about that night. How did you have the courage to walk into that meeting alone? Frank thought for a long moment. It wasn't courage. It was preparation. I spent 3 days learning everything I could about those men, their vulnerabilities, their secrets, their fears. By the time I walked into that restaurant, I knew more about them than they knew about themselves. That's not courage. That's homework. But weren't you afraid they'd kill you anyway? The reporter asked. Frank smiled. Of course I was afraid. Fear keeps you sharp. But I was more afraid of living under their rules than dying under my own. That's the difference between surviving and winning. The story of Frank Lucas at Bamonte's restaurant became legend in organized crime circles. Not because of violence, not because of threats, but because one man walked into a room full of killers with nothing but information and walked out with his freedom intact. The lesson isn't about crime. It's about power. Real power doesn't come from intimidation. It comes from preparation, from understanding your opponent better than they understand themselves, from being willing to risk everything on a well-calculated move. Frank Lucas proved that night that intelligence, preparation, and courage can defeat even the most established power structures. He walked into the lion's den unarmed and walked out a legend. But here's the part history often forgets. That leverage, that intelligence, that strategic brilliance that saved Frank's life that night. It couldn't save him from the consequences of his choices. 3 years later, federal agents arrested him. The empire he'd built collapsed. The independence he'd fought for at Bamonte's meant nothing in a federal courtroom. Because in the end, no amount of intelligence can outrun justice. No strategy can defeat the consequences of breaking the law. Frank Lucas spent years in prison, lost his fortune, lost his family's respect, and spent his final decades warning young people not to follow his path. "I was smart," he'd say in those speeches, "but I was smart in service of something wrong. And being brilliant at the wrong thing doesn't make you successful. It just makes you a cautionary tale." If this story of strategy, courage, and ultimate accountability inspired you, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you understand that preparation is more powerful than intimidation, but character is more important than both. Share this with someone who needs to hear that intelligence without ethics leads nowhere worth going. And let me know in the comments, what's the difference between being clever and being wise? Turn on notifications because next time, we're telling the story of the choice Frank Lucas made that defined his legacy. Not his empire, but what he became after it fell. You don't want to miss it. Remember, the most dangerous weapon you can carry isn't in your hand. It's in your head. But the most important thing you can carry is your conscience.